Today we will be looking at two horrifying caving stories that went horribly wrong. The first one in particular will leave you befuddled as the caver gets stuck in a disorienting caving loop, failing to find a way out. As for the second one, it's even more distressing. As always, viewer discretion is advised. May 25th, 2003, dawned clear and bright, perfect for the outdoor adventure Chris Molyneux had planned for his family. At 36, Chris considered himself an experienced caver, having visited several of Washington's lava tubes over the years. His previous expedition to Ape Cave with his older children had sparked their enthusiasm for underground exploration. And today, he intended to satisfy their curiosity with a visit to Rink Cave. The night before, Chris had carefully programmed his GPS with coordinates he'd obtained from a caving forum. He'd studied the cave map, noting the multiple entrances and the distinctive ice formation that gave the cave its name. The expedition seemed perfect for a family outing. A short hike from the parking area, a brief underground adventure, and back home in time for dinner. The Molyneux family minivan bumped along the Forest Service road, climbing steadily into the mountains. His wife Michelle sat quietly in the passenger seat, while their three children, ages 7, 4, and 18 months, chattered excitedly in the back. Chris parked about 200 yards from where his GPS indicated the cave entrance should be. He unloaded their minimal gear, hoisted the baby carrier onto Michelle's back, and led his family along a faint trail through the pine forest. They soon came upon a depression in the ground with a dark opening, a sinkhole entrance to what Chris presumed was Rink Cave. Studying the opening and comparing it to his map, uncertainty crept in. The map indicated several entrances, and he couldn't be certain which one they had found. Nevertheless, the day was perfect, the children were eager, and Chris felt confident in his abilities. He strapped on his helmet, clicked on his headlamp, and secured his fanny pack containing 2 backup lights, spare batteries, and the folded cave map. Without conscious thought, he slipped the car keys into his pocket. Chris decided to scout ahead alone, planning to verify the route before bringing his family inside. He would check whether this passage connected to the main chamber with its namesake ice formation. The entrance passage narrowed as Chris descended, the temperature dropping noticeably with each step. After approximately 100 feet, he encountered what appeared to be a dead end, with only a small 18-inch high crawlway continuing to the right. Unfolding his map in the beam of his headlamp, he studied the layout. The configuration seemed to match a section near the west entrance. If his orientation was correct, he could navigate through the crawl, travel a short distance through the main passage, and emerge at the larger entrance featuring the ice deposit, a perfect loop for the family to explore. Chris dropped to his hands and knees and squeezed through the tight opening, pushing his fanny pack ahead of him. Emerging on the other side, he found himself in a larger passage extending both left and right. According to his understanding of the map, the main entrance should lie to the left. He turned in that direction and proceeded confidently, the beam of his headlamp cutting through the absolute darkness. The minutes stretched as he walked, the passage extending farther than anticipated. After some time, he encountered a section of breakdown, collapsed ceiling, and tumbled boulders that wasn't indicated on his map. Confusion flickered across his mind, but he reasoned that perhaps the map was outdated or simplified. He carefully picked his way through the obstacles, convinced the main entrance must lie just ahead. Finally, Chris arrived at what appeared to be a collapsed entrance, completely plugged with dirt and debris. No light penetrated the fill. Standing before this unexpected barrier, a cold sensation spread between his shoulder blades. This didn't match the map at all. Checking his watch, he realized he'd been gone much longer than the quick reconnaissance he'd promised Michelle. Chris turned back, retracing his steps through the breakdown section. His pace quickened as concern for his waiting family grew. After walking for what seemed longer than his inbound journey, he arrived at another apparent collapsed entrance. It looked strikingly similar to the one he'd just left. Disorientation washed over him as he tried to reconcile this impossibility with his mental map. To confirm his suspicion, Chris bent down and scratched a large X in the dirt with his finger. Heart pounding, he turned and walked in the opposite direction, counting his steps. Approximately 400 paces later, his headlamp illuminated the same X marked in the dirt. A wave of dizziness threatened to overwhelm him as the reality of his situation crystallized. He was trapped in a circular passage with no obvious exit. The crawlway had to be here somewhere. It couldn't have simply vanished. Chris forced himself to calm his accelerating heartbeat and think rationally. He decided to systematically search the outer wall of the loop, running his hand along the cool rock surface. As he walked, awareness of time's passage intensified his anxiety. He'd been underground for over an hour now. Michelle would be frantic. The weight of the car keys in his pocket suddenly felt like an anchor. His family was effectively stranded at the trailhead with no transportation, no way to seek help without abandoning the children or forcing them on a long hike. His methodical search of the outer wall yielded nothing. No crawlway, no escape route. Chris completed another circuit, this time examining the inner wall with equal attention. Still nothing. The beam of his headlamp seemed dim, though he knew he had fresh batteries. The darkness pressed closer, almost tangible in its oppression. Trying to maintain order in his search, Chris tore small pieces from his cave map and placed them at distinctive features along the loop. Breakdown piles, unusual formations, the collapsed entrance. After his third complete circuit, finding himself once again at his starting point with no sign of the crawlway, the first tendrils of genuine panic took root in his chest. His breathing became shallow and rapid, sweat dampening his shirt despite the cave's chill. 5 hours had passed. 5 hours of circling in the darkness, each circuit feeding his growing disorientation. Chris no longer knew exactly what he was looking for. The cramped opening had grown mythical in his mind, a portal that might have never existed. Each rock, each contour of the wall started to look identical, features blending together in the narrow cone of his headlamp beam. Exhaustion began to take its toll. Chris sat heavily on a boulder, his mind replaying the moment he had entered the crawlway. Had he actually turned left after emerging, or right? His certainty wavered. Perhaps his fundamental assumptions were wrong. Another hour passed as Chris made additional circuits, each more desperate than the last. The cave seemed to shift around him, passages stretching and contracting in his perception. The absolute darkness beyond his light beam felt alive, watching, waiting for his light to fail. His throat constricted with thirst. The silence pressed against his eardrums, broken only by his footsteps and increasingly ragged breathing. A new terrible thought emerged, that this was no ordinary cave. Stories of cavers lost forever in mountain tunnels surfaced from his memory. Perhaps this place had claimed others before him, trapping them in its circular passage until their lights failed and the darkness consumed them. Chris's legs trembled as he stood for another circuit. He had been underground for nearly 6 hours now, circumnavigating the loop perhaps a dozen times. He tried calling out, knowing the futility. The entrance was too far away, the earthen walls too effective at swallowing sound. His voice echoed briefly then died, emphasizing his isolation. Suddenly, something inside Chris snapped. The weight of his situation crashed down upon him all at once. His composure shattered like glass. Chris fell to his knees, the damp cave floor soaking through his pants. His body shook with sobs that wrenched themselves from deep in his chest. The beam of his headlamp danced wildly across the walls as his shoulders heaved. "Please," he begged the darkness, his voice barely above a whisper now. "Please, I need to get out. My family needs me." His fingers clawed at the dirt floor, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on his face. Time stretched meaninglessly in the darkness. Minutes or hours might have passed as Chris knelt there, his reserves of hope draining away. The faces of his children flashed before his mind's eye, their excitement this morning, their trust in him. The thought that he might never see them again was unbearable. Then, from some deep reserve, a flicker of determination kindled. His children were waiting. Michelle would be terrified. He was their father, their protector, the man who promised adventure and safety in equal measure. They needed him to find his way back. In desperation, Chris returned to the collapsed entrance and began again, this time staying low to the ground, examining every inch of wall near floor level. 50 feet from the dirt plug, he paused. Something about the shadow pattern seemed different. He crouched lower, directing his beam along the base of the wall. There it was, an opening barely 18 inches high, partially obscured by a protruding rock. Relief surged through him, immediately followed by disbelief at his blindness. The crawlway had been here all along, just 50 feet, 15 meters, from the collapsed entrance. Chris realized his critical error. Upon entering the cave and emerging from the crawl, he had indeed turned left, as he recalled. but he had then walked almost the entire loop before encountering the collapsed entrance. Not recognizing this, he had formed the mistaken impression that the crawl must be on the opposite side of the loop. He dropped to his knees and scrambled through the opening, overwhelmed by relief as he recognized the initial passage. Minutes later, he emerged into the golden afternoon sunlight, blinking painfully as his eyes adjusted. The forest seemed impossibly vibrant after the monochromatic darkness of the cave. The parking area stood empty. Michelle and the children were gone. Chris stood alone in the mountain silence, the weight of his error pressing down on him. Only later would he learn that Michelle, growing increasingly concerned, had taken the children and hiked back to the road, eventually hitching a ride to a Forest Service station, where she had requested assistance. She had returned with help just as Chris emerged from his underground prison, ending his 5-hour ordeal in Minotaur Cave, a name the formation would receive following the incident that nearly made it his tomb. This next story has the most terrifying end. The exploration of Roaring River Cave began with meticulous planning. A team of specialized cave divers assembled to conduct a survey of the underwater passages within this Missouri cave system. Eric Hahn, a 27-year-old diver, had a specific role assigned for the October 14, 2022 operation. He would place stage bottles at strategic depths and serve as a safety diver for the team venturing deeper into the cave. The dive plan divided the team into specific roles. 2 divers would form the deep team, pushing into the furthest reaches of the cave. Hahn would work with a 3rd diver to position extra breathing gas cylinders at 40 meters, 130 feet, and 58 meters, 190 feet, below the surface, creating safety checkpoints for the deeper exploration. These stage bottles would provide emergency gas reserves at critical points throughout the underwater cave system. Roaring River Cave presented unique challenges. Its underwater passages descended rapidly from the entry point, requiring technical diving skills and specialized equipment. The cave's limestone passages formed a complex 3-dimensional maze, with narrow restrictions alternating with larger chambers. Water clarity could change dramatically within minutes if sediment was disturbed from the cave floor. The morning of the dive began with standard pre-dive checks. Each team member verified their equipment, gas supplies, and reviewed emergency procedures. Technical cave diving demands redundant systems and extensive backup planning. Hahn was using a closed-circuit rebreather, advanced equipment that recycles breathing gas by scrubbing carbon dioxide and adding precise amounts of oxygen as needed. This technology allows for longer underwater times, but requires careful monitoring and maintenance. At 11:12 a.m., Eric Hahn entered the water. His descent followed the guideline, a continuous safety rope that shows the way out of the cave, as he made his way to the deeper sections. The temperature dropped noticeably as he descended, and the ambient light from the surface entrance quickly faded to complete darkness, illuminated only by his powerful dive lights. 12 minutes into the dive, at 11:24 a.m., Hahn reached the 58-meter, 190-foot tie-off point. Here, he had a brief interaction with a member of the deeper dive team. This diver later reported that Hahn appeared normal during this encounter, with no signs of distress or confusion. Hahn continued with his assigned task of positioning the stage bottle at this depth. What happened next occurred with alarming speed. At 11:25 a.m., just 1 minute after the seemingly normal interaction, Hahn suddenly collided forcefully with his partner, Diver 3, and began swimming upward rapidly, a dangerous action at such depth. This sudden behavior change signaled a serious problem. Diver 3 immediately recognized the emergency and pursued Hahn to provide assistance. He managed to catch up with the rapidly ascending diver when Hahn struck a rocky ceiling at 50 meters, 165 feet. At this point, Hahn was visibly struggling with his rebreather breathing loop. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Diver 3 attempted to help by reaching for Hahn's bailout regulator, an emergency breathing source separate from the rebreather. Before the helper could properly position it, Hahn pulled his rebreather mouthpiece out without closing it, a critical error that allowed water to flood the breathing circuit. As Diver 3 inserted the bailout regulator and purged it to clear water, Hahn began to convulse violently. These convulsions were consistent with oxygen toxicity seizure, a serious medical emergency that can occur when a diver breathes gas with too high an oxygen partial pressure at depth. During such seizures, a diver loses consciousness and control of bodily movements, creating an immediately life-threatening situation underwater. Diver 3 struggled to position Han in the rescue position while maintaining control of both the convulsing diver and the emergency regulator. The physical demands of this rescue attempt at depth were enormous. The pair sank to the bottom of the cave passage at 62 meters, 204 feet. Visibility deteriorated rapidly as the struggle disturbed the fine silt covering the cave floor. Eventually, the conditions became too dangerous for the rescue to continue. Diver 3 had lost visual contact with the guideline, the critical safety rope that marked the exit path. Continuing the rescue attempt without this reference point risked both divers becoming lost in the cave. Physical exhaustion was setting in, and Diver 3's own gas supplies were diminishing. Meanwhile, Diver 1 from the deeper team had ascended to get help. Diver 3, forced to abandon the rescue attempt, began his ascent and encountered a member of the deeper team, Diver 2, during a decompression stop. This diver attempted to descend to assist Han, but faced the same challenges: limited visibility, distance from the safety line, and dangerously high oxygen levels in his own breathing gas at that depth. At 11:35 a.m., just 23 minutes after Han had entered the water, another team member, Diver 4, descended to approximately 18 meters, 58 feet, and observed Diver 3 returning without Han. This observation confirmed to the surface team that the mission had shifted from rescue to recovery. The surface manager made the difficult but necessary decision to halt any further rescue attempts, instructing all divers to complete their required decompression stops and exit safely. Professional recovery operations began at 4 p.m. when the Missouri Highway Patrol Technical Diving Team arrived. They located Han's body at approximately 61 meters, 200 feet depth. The post-recovery examination provided important clues about what had occurred. Han's rebreather loop was open and removed from his mouth. His bailout regulator was in his mouth with a slight free flow of gas. His cylinders still contained breathing gas, indicating that running out of gas had not been the primary issue. The subsequent analysis by cave diving experts identified several critical factors that likely contributed to the tragedy. Han appeared to have miscalculated or misunderstood the maximum operating depths for his breathing gases. His diluent gas, the base gas used in his rebreather, lacks sufficient helium content for operations at this depth. This would have increased his susceptibility to nitrogen narcosis, a condition similar to intoxication that impairs judgment and slows reaction times proportionally to depth. Additionally, evidence suggested Han had been manually adding significant amounts of oxygen to his breathing loop. At 58 meters, 190 feet, even small additions of oxygen can rapidly increase the partial pressure to dangerous levels, potentially triggering the oxygen toxicity seizure that was observed. The cave diving section's analysis noted that individual susceptibility to oxygen toxicity varies significantly between divers. While some people can tolerate brief exposures to elevated oxygen levels, others may experience seizures with minimal exposure. The investigation could not determine if Han had any undisclosed medical conditions or was taking medications that might have lowered his seizure threshold. The Roaring River Cave incident underscored several fundamental principles of technical cave diving safety. Proper gas planning, strict adherence to maximum operating depths for breathing gases, and conservative oxygen exposure limits are not merely guidelines, but critical safety boundaries. The incident also highlighted the extreme difficulty of performing underwater rescues at significant depths, especially when visibility is compromised and the affected diver is incapacitated. For the cave diving community, the loss of Eric Han became a sobering reminder of the unforgiving nature of underwater caves and the critical importance of proper training, equipment configuration, and gas management. The team members who attempted to save him demonstrated extraordinary courage, but the combination of depth, gas toxicity, and rapid onset of symptoms created a situation where rescue became impossible despite their best efforts. The waters of Roaring River Cave continue to flow, carrying the memory of a young explorer whose final dive serves as both a tragedy and a learning opportunity for those who venture into the hidden underwater worlds beneath Missouri's landscape.